All right, welcome everybody to our Tinderbox meetup. Happy Easter. I think we have one more for April, so this is our second to last April Tinderbox meetup. Happy Easter. Thank you for those that are showing up. Hey, Mary Beth. And let's just jump right in. So typically when I'm not sure if Mark Weinstein's is coming or not today, so we'll just go right into it. And excuse me, some of my guests are barking. Here's one of this is Archie. He's one of my guests. Um, so typically, the way we run the meetups is we go around the room and we have new people introduce themselves. But Belsa, you're not allowed to be in the meeting. Shush. And we then we'll talk about themes if we have any. We don't have a theme right now, and then we jump into the projects that anybody may be working on. And we don't have a theme, so let's just jump right into projects. And I actually have something I think would be fun for us all to try to decompose and work on, if we're so inclined. But before we get into my pet project, let's see what anybody else is working on. Melvin, Rot, Dave, Kenneth, Kim, Mark, what's going on with you guys?
I have a brief question. When we were doing the link thing last week, there was a keyword combination you could use to open a link in its own text window. Uh, when you're going from the Command 7, what is the name of that panel down?
Command 7 opens up the link pane,
The link pane.
and
You
then
could,
when you mouse over any link, that will
yeah.
pop up a window, and you drag your mouse against the bottom edge of that window, and that will open up the link, that
That
window.
doesn't take place in a text link. Is that correct? You,
I don't know. It does not.
yeah.
That's
That
only
that would
taking.
be a nice affordance in text links, I think. But I'll pursue that later.
I mean, yeah, no, yeah, because it's opening up an actual standalone note. I don't believe it's reaching out to a specific note, or we can test it before I
Well,
run off and say no.
it takes you to the note in the outline and
Right,
where
but you're saying the mousing over doesn't appear to create a
no, it
pop up
doesn't. And
pop up window.
didn't seem to be a command or a key combination that would open that link in its own little window. Um, which
Let's
I
take a
think would
look.
be, so you could remain in that, as Paul would say, in your context and just get a window of the note that was linked to see if that's what you were interested in visiting, and then you could
Yeah,
do that. But
yeah. Let's take a look at this.
I might ask Mark if that's something he could
Well,
hold
well,
into.
well, for those that maybe have no idea what we're talking about, let's go ahead and demonstrate it. So if we have note one and we have note two, and we will
Make text links.
yeah, but we're going to do this first. And what Dave is referring to is this idea here. So if you have two notes related to each other, we'll call it just, I don't know, evidence, right? And seven, so you can see that this note is linked to this note as an outbound note. This note is linked to this note as an inbound note. And then if you mouse over, you can pop off that window like that. And then that allows you to then edit that note in context. So what Dave is referring to, though, is let's say you had some text like this, and we said note one, like that. And no, it does, Dave. Look.
Down there in
Pop.
the panel, but if you in the t so go put
Oh,
your
but you're saying if
cursor.
you're hovering over that, that would
Correct.
be nice.
Yeah.
Got it.
Yeah. And
Um,
if you click that link, it takes you to that note in the out.
right. But I would argue though you're getting what you want just by opening up the text window. I mean, we could ask Mark to do it, but that might have some overhead because think about the processing power that would need to be had for managing the hover over states on any link.
Right.
And
Well,
imagine if it wasn't a internal text link, but it was actually an external web page.
right. So, I'm there. There may be issues, but it wouldn't necessarily be a hover. just a command key that would open that link in its own, open that note in its own little text window.
Yeah, okay. So what you're saying is if we right mouse clicked on that link, we could
Right.
say like open in text window, just like when we right mouse click on a note like this, and we say open in text window, that will
Uh,
open up.
yeah.
Make sure that will open up that window on. I don't know if you guys can.
So
Can you see the
is it,
note too?
Dave, is it more that you're thinking you want to do something like it's a modified click, so a shift click or a control click or whatever? So I do get this. I mean, this is one of the problems that comes about with it. There are several discrete communities of practice. There are people who are entirely sort of not pointer dependent, who stay hands firmly on the keyboard. Whereas I'm admittedly more in the mixed mode thing. I do understand this thing. Sometimes you want something you can point at and do. Whether it's only on the context, either the right click pop up thing, or actually available via a modified click, because I don't think there's any ambiguity. If you do a modified click of a link, there's nothing else to really explain it for, and the modification should send a clear signal of intent. So I wouldn't think it's necessarily complex. I guess it's just something that nobody's asked for before, which is often the way with things.
Right.
Yeah.
So the idea is you may have a note two may have a list of links in there with limited descriptions. This goes back to the table of contents concept, which I haven't played with since I'm getting ready to move. But uh, just to stay in that note and then get a quick look at what it linked to, and then from that you could make a determination what you wanted to do with that window, dismiss it or dive into it and do something with it.
Yeah. It's probably worth mentioning, just for the general record, that because this isn't as a sort of as a follow-on for what you're saying, but for those who aren't familiar with the roadmap view, that's another way to see how things are doing. Which sort of the roadmap predates, goes I think all the way back to the beginning of Tinderbox.
So you
Predates
click roadmap
yeah.
here.
And what you basically get, and this is one of the few pop-ups you can tear off, and you can tell if you look at the top right-hand corner of that window, that little double window icon indicates that pop-up can be, if you basically drag it, it becomes a standalone window. And in fact, you can use the roadmap to walk by double clicking on items in the either column in the roadmap. You can actually navigate around. So it's yet another way to get around things. It's unsurprising that you get some degree of parallel evolution here, because different people find utility for different views, and it's not necessarily that there has to be one that is right for all people.
How does
and I see you can tear off the window, Mark.
Yep.
But it doesn't here, let's see. Okay, no, it does. So I can click around. No, but it doesn't refresh as you move yourself around.
No, right. No. The idea of the roadmap is you use you're doing it the other way around. You go in the roadmap, and by double clicking the links in the roadmap, it actually moves the selection in the view. So if you double click note 3 or double click note 2.
No, look at that. But it's not though. So if you watch me clicking around, it's clicking around, but it's not changing the view.
Okay, it's changing the context of the roadmap.
Oh no, here, focus on that. So I go to 2. The focus is on 3. How do I change the focus?
Well, I think the point being, you opened it originally on note 3, and what it's trying to help you do, because think back a bit, because this goes all the way back to the dawn of Tinderbox, and when some things were harder to do. But essentially, it was a way of looking at what is linked to here. We have so many more ways of doing it now. We can use, for instance, you could use a hyperbolic view. You could just switch that current view into a hyperbolic view and look at all the things that are linked. And the only difference, the difference that you get with a hyperbolic view compared to a map, there will be, in a sense, little difference in this case, because you have 3 interlinked notes all in the same container. Hyperbolic view, though, is agnostic as to where in which container things live. So it will show you links that cross container boundaries. And so you can have 2 notes linked in different parts of the document. And the hyperbolic view is drawn on a so-called hyperbolic plane. So towards it's like a sort of fisheye effect. The things in the middle are slightly larger. The things towards the edge are shown smaller. But by changing the focus of the view, you can actually walk around the network. It's another way of actually understanding the interrelation of the objects. But it's a non-Euclidean display, and dependent on sort of how you think about your things, that may or may not be a useful thing.
All right. Okay, so maybe you can pop that into the backstage.
Yeah, it's not
Dave.
urgent.
No, I know it's not urgent, but to Mark's point, just pop a comment into the backstage so it gets onto Mr. Bernstein's development spike. All right. So does anybody else have any other topics, comments, questions they're working on? I've got a couple of things that I can.
Yeah, Michael, I got one thing I'd like to sort of introduce to the team a little bit. Can I share my screen?
Of course.
Okay, so this is can you see this at all?
Yeah.
This is I'm working on where I work right now. They provide you with opportunities to improve yourself, right? So I'm trying to improve myself from a leadership perspective. So I've taken this assessment. This is an assessment called the LCP Leadership Profile Circle, and so I came up. And you want to actually, if you see these white areas to the right here, these are deficiencies. So I wanted to figure out how to actually improve myself. So I need to work on achieving. So I'm not achieving. I'm a bad achiever or whatever. So I need to work on that for my year. So I'm trying to figure out, and also achieving is broken down by being more decisiveness, having be decisive what you're trying to do, strategic focus, all these areas. I had to work on achieving. So what I came up with a plan that I wanted to actually learn what that is. Get into the LCP. They give you definitions of what that of achieving and what is being decisiveness and all that good stuff. So I want to use the Bloom's taxonomy to actually really get into information, get different perspectives on it. But also I said to myself, well, okay, I'll have some knowledge. I can definitely break it down into some of those dimensions with Bloom's. That's great. But how do I actually learn it? And I'm thinking, well, maybe I should teach it. Maybe I should actually get into learning these terms, break it down, Bloom's technology, get the knowledge dimensions, really break it down, not analysis paralysis, but break it down. But then maybe if I could teach it, I could probably learn it, right? I've always said, if you could teach it, you're going to probably have a better idea of understanding it. So I said to myself, well, Becker's 5 C's, get into actually curating the information, get out and start forming some ways to teach it. Then I said to myself, well, okay, that's great. Get into Becker's 5 C's. But also then actually the Merrill's is actually the presentation manual, how to actually do a presentation and really apply these areas, the Bloom's, the Becker's, and the Merrill's, and really put together a package deal. And of course I blew my manager away. I'm like, oh, he's like, what the heck? You're crazy, Kim. But no, I'm serious. I want to learn. And so I haven't got this into Tinderbox yet, but I think this might be a good project to, use these 3 dimensions, you might say, the Bloom's, Becker's, and the Merrill's, and, learn the knowledge, curate the knowledge per se, get it organized, maybe create some new knowledge as well, right, with Becker, and then and get into the Merrill stuff and learn how to present it. So it'll be a total package. And I actually facilitate a community of practice where I work, where I get together with people and we present stuff. So it'd be a great way for me to actually facilitate this project. And this will be going on for a year. But I thought I'd get into the, use some of your stuff, Michael. Also, there's actually another book out called The 5 C's of Knowledge Management. You've seen this, right? I'm sure Stan Garfield, for librarians. He's got a book out for 5 C's. Basically, close to what you're talking about, Michael, but it's not really in curation and stuff. But this is another good book as well. Your concepts.
We're not seeing that if you're making a reference to it.
Yeah, here it's called The 5 C's of KM versus the 5 C's of knowledge making. I think you call your stuff knowledge making.
No, I call my knowledge management. It's not making.
Oh, all right. Anyway, Stan created a book. Sorry, but yours is stuff. Yours.
No, we've got some very, very interesting.
But here's my project. So I'm going to try. I haven't got this in the Tinderbox. I don't want to go into today, folks, if you don't mind. Next time I'll provide something for the team here and break it down. But this to me sounds like a kind of an interesting potential for a Tinderbox project. Get into it, step all the actual attributes and the actual features and stuff for me to learn Tinderbox. But anyway, I'll stop sharing.
Can you share a link to Stan's stuff?
Yeah, I will.
And then can you share a link to the Merrill as well? And I'll share a link to Merrill, Stan stuff, and Bloom, if you don't mind.
Yeah. Yeah, I'll send that to you within this call. Yeah, I can't do it right now, but I will.
Yeah. My quick little search looks like Merrill was coming up to that in around 2023-ish. Which is interesting.
Yeah, he's got a second version of his principles of instruction knowledge application. But if you don't mind, I'd like to use your Becker 5C.
Stan was coming up with his 5Cs around 2023.
Right.
Looks like.
But it's similar. Right. I mean, there's some similar.
Yeah, it's similar. I'm just looking at dates. I initially published my first one around 2020, so I preceded that for about 3 years. So
you got him. Yeah. Did you copyright your stuff? Maybe you can.
I did actually. I actually did. So we'll see.
You got to spank him.
Yeah.
Philip Stan, but he's a great guy. But anyway, I also have shared that this is one of my concepts I want to get into.
I should actually. Do you know him actually?
I've met him one time when they did they have a symposium of knowledge management in Europe, and I did talk to him a little bit, but no, I don't know him.
We should reach out to him, get him to speak in our session. I will take that on as an action item. Okay. Thanks for that. No, I think that's a great idea, and it's a perfect application of what you're trying to achieve. And then within Tinderbox, you can build a whole project plan around it. You can give yourself tracking. I mean, there's just so many cool things you can do with that. Yeah, so I'll come back to the team. Let me get it going a little bit, and then you can definitely digest it and dissect it and do the Becker magic. But for me to learn the actual Tinderbox, you really got to do something. So you have to know what you want to do, and I do. I have sort of an outline, and that's the hardest part, right, for Tinderbox. Thank you. Yeah. Say that again. I like your quote. I need to write it down. My mouse is going crazy. To learn Tinderbox, you have to what? You have to sort of know what you want to do. No Tinderbox, you have to know what you want to do. I don't know. What am I trying to say, guys? You know what you don't have any purpose of what you're trying to do with Tinderbox. You can't. I mean, there's so many tools. You have to have a focus. And you have to have some sort of a project, and you have to, use Tinderbox as a tool. Without a focus, you can't really get anything done with it. I mean, there's so much going on. It's so powerful. Got it. So to learn Tinderbox, you have to know what you want to do, have a focus, have a project in mind, or a problem, aka a problem to solve.
It's also in the recording.
Amen.
Yeah, I got it. But I just want a quote to be able to attribute to Kim without having to go back to the recording. Okay. And Mark Anderson has similar comments like that, have a problem to solve, or, a specific thing in mind to help. And I talk about that as well in my classes. Okay. So does anybody else have any other topics that they want to bring up and discuss, or what they're working on, or anything they particularly want to learn or try to learn? If not, I can demonstrate something that I just released a couple days ago really quick. And then, if you guys don't mind, I would love to ideate on a unique problem that I probably could solve it, but it would be more fun to solve together. So before I jump into that, let me know what anybody else wants to talk about. And I'll give you a few seconds, and if I don't hear anything, the gavel will drop, and I'll move forward. All right. Gavel's going to drop. All right. So first thing I want to demonstrate, which I think is kind of fun, is, and then I'll go into my specific request of your help, is this pen. Okay. So we were talking last week. Mark Bernstein made mention, or maybe 2 weeks ago, made mention about my 5Cs publishing system and the way I use Pandoc and other utilities to be able to publish output out of Tinderbox. And actually I did come up with something that would be worthy of note too in this exact example, Mark Anderson, that I would love to have you, now that I think about it, I have two things I want to try to ideate on against if we can. So what this publishing system allows you to do is I've built in the template so you can preview your content, you can look at your content and work with it, primarily leveraging markdown methodologies here. And one of the things that I discovered along the way is if you have citations in your content, like you say here, it says Thomas 2019. And if I were to preview that content using my Pandoc preview feature, what Pandoc will dutifully do is drop the references at the end of a note. And that's exactly what you want it to do. Now, the way, just so people are aware, the way Tinderbox works is when, and you can set up your Tinderbox templates in any number of different ways. But when Tinderbox is going through the templating structure to be able to process a note, it looks at the note, processes it, goes to the next note, looks at the note, processes it, goes to the next note, looks at the next note, processes it. And so if you were to be using a tool like Pandoc, which is a universal document converter, every individual note as you processed it, if you were processing it with Pandoc, it would put the references section at the bottom of every single note. And that's obviously, if you're outputting an entire article, you don't want every individual little section of your article to have its own reference section. That would make no sense. So the method that I developed for that was, I call it the create draft method. And essentially what that code is doing is it's saying, grab all of the content, export it all out to a single note, and then stick it in a single note. So now if I go up and click my is create draft, hang on, let me pull out my AirPods so you can. I also built in an affirmation system that you've all heard before, but the affirmation system is codable as well. So I'll change the first name just so it's not always me being awesome. Let's say it was Roger. So if I change the first name of the author in this particular file to Roger, when I go ahead and hit create.
Roger, you are awesome. Your draft is ready.
Right.
Great job.
So you basically can build into the system to have the tool, have Tinderbox giving you affirmation at 3 in the morning when you're trying to do work and you're pulling your hair out. So that's so what that does though is that allows you to then basically take your document, compile it all together as a single standalone HTML document, and then therefore now when I render that entire article, the references show up at the bottom as opposed to each of the individual elements. So that's one part of the development that I had here. Now, one thing that I do want to point out for those people that are listening, and another thing I learned in the process, is as I was developing my publishing system and the templating, obviously I personally don't like to include embedded images into my Tinderbox file for a variety of reasons. One, it locks the content in that note in that particular Tinderbox file, as opposed to it being on my hard drive, which then makes it kind of universally accessible across all of my projects. The second thing, and this is what I discovered as I was beta testing my module, is if you have an image, an embedded image, and this makes total sense once you actually think about it. If you have an embedded image in a Tinderbox file, and then you try to export it, if you look at the code, what ends up happening, and if you notice, I also built in little shows that says your images aren't going to display because you're using embedded images. Because what ends up happening is the Tinderbox is doing exactly what you're telling it to do, include this image, and it's including a relative reference to that image. But if I'm exporting this document out to some other directory in my hard drive that's more than two steps away from that relative path, Tinderbox, that HTML file that gets exported will have no ability, it won't be able to find the image, and so therefore the image won't display. So which makes total logical sense. So with that in mind, if you're using embedded images and then you're leveraging a methodology like publish to PDF or publish to Pandoc, using embedded images actually has a limitation, and that it makes it harder for you to be able to manage the inclusion of images within your output. And so I just put in a little double check so that if someone is previewing a document that's being ready to be exported out via Pandoc or PDF, it just says it appears you're using embedded images. Just be aware that those images won't show up. Now, the way around that is, and we've done this ad nauseum through my other training programs, is you can achieve the same thing if you actually use, and this file doesn't have my media management methodology in it, but I did hard code these images in this test example. You just basically put the direct path to that image wherever that image is sitting on your hard drive. And if you do that, then regardless of where you publish this document, the HTML will always be able to find that image and it will resolve. And so to give you an example of that, let me go ahead and pull this over and I'll demonstrate these two issues. And then I want to demonstrate one other thing, and maybe Mark Anderson can help me figure this out in just a second. So the other thing I did then with this methodology is, so now that you've published your draft, you'll see up on the top, I've set 2 booleans that will trigger my exporting code. And export to PDF is using a command line library called WheezyPrint for PDF. And then exporting to Pandoc is, I've got this hard coded to be exporting to Microsoft Word. But given that Pandoc's a universal document converter, you can have it exporting to PowerPoint or to any number of different formats you want. So when I hit export to PDF,
Roger, you are awesome. Your draft is ready.
you'll see
Great job.
Tinderbox exports the HTML document and then dutifully gives us the perfectly formatted PDF document. And it also, using style sheets, I've got it set up so that you can actually get pagination and manage your footers. And the way I figured out how to manage that was I created a header footer list, and there's 3 positions in the list. And if you position 0, position 1, and position 2, and whatever you put in these 3 positions will be inserted as the left, center, and right of your PDF footer. So that was kind of cool to figure out. And for the purposes of my template, I've hard coded the center and the right to be your pages and your date. But that's easily changeable in the templates if you get around to it. So that's one example. And then if you notice here, if I export this version,
Roger, you are awesome.
To
Your
PDF.
draft is ready. Great job.
as expected, the embedded images just don't show up because the relative references aren't there, whereas the embedded, the direct path images do in that way. So that's just something to be aware of if you are using any number of these different libraries to be publishing out of Tinderbox. And there's hundreds of these libraries. I personally just picked on Pandoc and WheezyPrint, but in the file I provided here, you'll see I use Homebrew as my command line manager, and there's various alternatives for Homebrew. There's various alternatives for Pandoc, and there's various alternatives for WheezyPrint as well. So you can kind of experiment with these different libraries at your will and what you want to do with that. The other thing that you can do here then too is if I export to Pandoc or Word.
Roger, you are awesome. Your draft is ready. Great job.
You'll see that this also exports your perfectly formatted Microsoft Word document as well. So, in the end, it looks pretty simple. Great, I got a PDF and I got a Word document, and that's really cool. But the level of, hang on, my computer is freezing on me. Where'd my mouse go? Okay. It's just a ridiculous amount of hours went into streamlining and making all these little nuances work. Now, let me demonstrate, see if I can demonstrate. I want to demonstrate something in a different file here. So now if I grab my installer here, and you'll note that I can take this publishing capability now and install it into any Tinderbox file. And if I'm here and I ask it to, what I'm going to do here. This will let me demonstrate the problem I want to run with Mark Anderson now. And so now if I'm here and I want to launch it and I'm like, I get really excited and I want to create my draft, Tinderbox is going to automatically tell me, hey, wait a minute, you can't publish anything until you've populated your configuration file with the paths to your command line apps. So if I go now here and grab the variables that I need to populate here. Data directory. Export directory. And finally, I need my homebrew path. So now that I've got those variables populated, you now can see that I can take this publishing capability and
Michael, you are awesome.
stick
Your
it
draft is
into
ready.
stick
Great
it
job.
into any document. So that's really cool. Now, Mark Anderson, this is what I something I found that was kind of interesting. If I have two articles of the same name, and we won't be able to debug this now. Maybe this is something we do on one of our weekly calls, but it's something that I identified, and we don't need to solve this right now. Just but I want to call it out. If you look at my create draft methodology, what I'm doing is I'm grabbing the path of this document of this particular article to then create the subdraft folder. And when I was doing my debugging, I'm like, wait a minute, why isn't the drafts folder being created? And then I realized it was being created just in the article above. So if I create the draft now.
Michael, you are awesome. Your draft is ready. Great job.
Because this article has the same name, its path is effectively the exact same thing as the one that comes above it in the hierarchy of the Tinderbox notes. And you'll see that the draft folder got recreated there.
Just out of interest, if instead of doing path this, if you did path ID this, because what you're nesting is, first of all, you get the ID of this note, and then you use the ID to get. No, because your path is still ambiguous. You just don't.
Your path is still ambiguous.
You don't want to be using path. So why are you having to use path there?
I don't know, maybe because it was just muscle memory along the way, but it also was trying to jump through any several other, like, like what would be the best way to replace path, where if I say get me my ID and then stick the drafts note as a child of this note with the ID.
The ID is always unique,
right?
Unless whereas the path cannot be. I mean, one of the reasons there is an ID is because, for all sorts of legitimate reasons, you may have notes that are effectively siblings that have the same title.
Right, exactly. So in this context, which I'm going to bring up again in just a minute. So let's say I grab the ID number of this note. What would the action code, and let's use this as a simpler example. And this is, by the way, for people that are developing in Tinderbox. I don't know if you can hear the wrestler, the WWE wrestling match that's happening behind me. Our Zoom might be filtering out the dogs. Hopefully there is. So let's say we had note 1 and note 2, and the point I was trying to say is, when in doubt, when you're working in action code and you're trying to develop something and you identify a discrete, what I'll call problem or interesting topic, like Kim Peterson mentioned earlier in our call today, one of the best ways and probably the optimal way to solve that or address that is not in your project file, but opening up a brand new file and just iterating on that very specific tactical thing for a bunch of reasons. One, you're isolating their problem, and 2, you're going to limit the risk of screwing up your other file as you test. So, in this context, then, so given the demo that we're trying to demonstrate right now, I want to be able to use action code to tell Tinderbox create a draft folder as a child of this note 1, not that note 1. So maybe we can go through that exercise. And often the first way to do that too is work with stamps as opposed to rules and edicts, just so you can iterate that. So Mr. Anderson, you want to guide us through your thoughts on that?
Well, I just saw you briefly show some code, and you had a line that said something like equals path this.
Right.
I don't know what the left-hand side you were setting, but but
It was
essentially,
it was just a variable VPAT. So it was a
fine.
variable string.
So basically you just want the ID because you want to know uniquely which object you wish to create a child for.
Right. So I've got,
by using path, you have an ambiguity, and I know that it may confuse people sometimes because I know that we discuss this. So Mark Benson will reasonably say, well, don't rush to use ID. The thing is, most people, for most of the time, the name of the note or the path of the note will actually be sufficient. It's much more approachable when you're learning the app and you don't have too much to do. But the moment you're doing anything of the sort of complexity of Michael's model here, the ID is essentially more helpful. And bear in mind that once you've actually written the code, you're never going to see it anyway. You're never going to see a 10-digit number. So the fact that a 10-digit number is less readable than a textual name becomes moot.
right. So I grab the ID.
Yep.
And I have an ID number, and then we want to use a create.
Yep.
So I guess what we need to do then is say create. Create that path first. Oh, I got it. That's how you do it. Path VID.
Yep.
Drafts. Got it. Nope.
Yeah, because you're creating it's because you're.
No, I grabbed the ID of this, what's selected. And now I'm telling it to create, grab the path of this ID and then create drafts. And the path of this ID is note 1.
Yeah, yes, exactly.
Right.
So
right.
You don't,
so I don't want to do that way.
If create won't let you use an ID rather than a path.
Let's see. No.
So that's then a sort of hard stop limitation at the moment. I mean, this gets to the heart of why you use IDs and not paths.
Yeah.
Because paths are fine up to a certain point. And for most general use, you generally don't reuse note names. It can happen, but it's not normal. But if you're doing any sort of structured writing, often you'll find that you may well be using the same thing. The other, it's worth bearing in mind as a general point that where the same name occurs more than once. So if you match a note on name, Tinderbox will go and find, basically it'll say, give me everything, well, give me the note called this name, and it gets sort of 6 of them back, for instance, that are scattered all over the document. It will always take the first one,
right?
Which is a good reason why, once you've sort of got past the basics and the early stage of using the application, a little more accuracy in specifying things normally repays you. You don't need, but I would stress for anyone who's sort of starting out with this, don't worry about that detail when you start. Just using the name is a convenient way to sort of learn how things work. It's only when you get to this level of detail you need to start thinking about these things. So
well, and honestly, I've been using for Tinderbox for 5 years. I've developed some of the most complicated templates ever, and this only cropped up when I was beta testing my file yesterday. So, I mean, talk about edge case.
I'm just checking my docs, and it seems to say yeah, I think basically that the missing bit of glue is that at the moment the create command doesn't accept an ID, essentially as a way of specifying the object to be added to, and so I don't think you work around that.
Okay, I didn't think so either. But I just wanted to run it by us as we do it. But I think that was a really fun exercise. So what I did was then, for the purposes of my file, because again, I didn't think people would do it. If you noticed, I had changed the file name earlier. And so, oops, I didn't want to do it there. Sorry. So if you notice here, I said CSA model. So, and how I discovered this was I've got now 5 modules in my publishing system. Each are using the 5 C's of knowledge management article. And so when each of them start installing over the top of each other, that article gets added to that consolidated file a handful of times for its unique demonstrable purposes. And then that's how I ended up discovering that.
There is one other, as we broach the subject, there is one other approach you can take, which I don't think you necessarily want to do here, but it's worth bearing in mind, is that bearing in mind that there is this notion of a display name for a note. So the note you see on the screen doesn't necessarily have to be the actual name of the note.
Correct.
And what I came across this moons ago, because I was basically doing a Tinderbox file, and the names of the notes for the thing that I was doing needed to be the name of the paper. There were a whole lot of academic papers, and it turns out, especially in computer science, people use things like all sort of special regex symbols and all sorts of stuff in the names of notes, which is just turns out to not be helpful. So what I did in the end was I effectively bowdlerized all the notes. So I took all the difficult stuff out of the note names, and so I stored the actual name separately for each note, and then I made the real name, the sort of the safe version, but I made I made the display name the real thing. The only thing to bear in mind if you do that is you then have to take on the responsibility of remembering when you want to say do an export or something, that where you might have normally used the title of the note, you actually need to use a different attribute. It's not difficult to do. It's just a little attention to detail, because otherwise you'll find you've got all the sort of, these odd sort of slightly treated names. But that is another approach that you can absolutely take.
No, you could, but in my context that doesn't work because
Sure. No, but I just thought for for anyone
but,
watching this, it's useful to know what other options there are.
Yeah, and for those watching, let's discuss what you just said. So Mark, so Tinderbox has this really killer functionality. So you see it says note 1 here, and this was named note 1. So maybe you can, if you go to the display expression tab, and display expression, as we all know, or hopefully you know by now, every note, whether or not it's visual or not, has display expression. You can change the value here, or in this case, you can change your value here and put it in. So let's say I wanted note 1 to be, and then the other thing to keep in mind is display expression is one of the attributes in Tinderbox that can actually render, will express action code. So, for example, if I could say name equals plus created. So what I'm essentially saying is make the display expression of this note equal to the name plus created. And I'm curious why it's not showing me, I'm getting the created date, but I'm not actually getting the name attribute, which is funny. Oh, because I spelled it wrong.
You missed that, yeah. One other useful thing to point out that often confuses, that it's obvious after the fact, but it's confusing at first sight, is that what you're actually doing in this box is you're typing the right-hand side of an action code that says $display expression equals. And what happens is Tinderbox takes what's in that box, evaluates it, and it populates a read-only attribute called display name, and that becomes what you see on screen.
Right. Now
you'll also notice that you'll notice how in the outline that it says note 1 with a date, but on the right-hand side, the selected note shows note 1. So that's the real name. That's dollar name of the note. What you see on the right is the output of display expression. And the one last thing that I'd also point out here, and I know it's something that Michael's covered in the past, is what you want to avoid doing is writing very, very complicated display expressions and putting them in display expression. The reason being that as your document grows, this is all being done on the fly, and there's a very simple trick to get around that, which is essentially what you do is you store the result of the expression, and then you make which you put in an attribute, and then you make the display expression just show the actual calculated output of the expression.
Correct.
So if you wanted to say,
So let's
the kind of thing
demonstrate that.
people
Well,
do
yeah,
is
Mark, let's pause really. So let's
Yeah.
demonstrate that. So I'm going to create an attribute called display expression cache, which will be an attribute value to cache the value of the display expression. And so then if I copy this and I put display expression cache here. So what this is now saying is the action code saying in the expression is saying make the display expression the value of display expression cache. And if display expression cache is empty, Tinderbox will default and put name, right? So as it's done here. But if display expression cache has a value, then it will use the value of display expression. And in this demonstration, let's go ahead and use the rule. And so we can just go like this. And so now I've put that action code into the rule. And if I run the rule.
no, you need to say display expression cache.
Oh yeah, because it's display expression. And then I say display expression cache equals name. So I'm basically, so then that's the point that Mark was just making a minute ago. So when you're doing it here, this is the right side of the equation. So this is what he meant by that. There's the right side of this equation, making this expression equal to display expression, in this context, display expression cache. So now when I run this attribute and I refresh the screen, you'll now see that that's changing. So what happens now is if you have 1,000 notes on your screen, the refreshing of the screen is not going to trigger all of that action code. And it won't bring your Tinderbox file to its knees. And that's basically how we came up with that methodology. Like 2.5 years ago, I called Mark Anderson like 3 a.m. crying over my doctoral dissertation because my file was stopping. And then that's when he taught me how to do that so that we could get all of that processing, out of the refreshing of the screen.
Yeah, I mean the method, the way that sort of method came about was it was a while back, and people were doing things that were not unnatural. They had someone's large research document, and you might doing things like you'd have container, and it might be basically reporting 5 or 6 calculated values as part of the title. So you set it up, what those numbers are, and that's extremely useful because you can quickly just sort of flick down the container names and see what things are. But if that's all being done as part of the update cycle, it makes the application a bit less responsive. It's not actually particularly slowing the computer down, it's just slowing the app down. So by pre-calculating that, because by and large, all those numbers you want to show are not changing second by second. So the display expression is running alongside the rule, it's updating all the time. And in fact, I think I saw that because we're running it in the rule, you'll see the note will update with the time because it keeps taking the time of the system. But yeah,
keep going.
Yeah, I was just going to say, so the thing is, if you're doing all these calculations, that's fine. And for instance, you can have them in, well, the best way normally, the sort of graduation I find that happens is that, when you're just learning and trying stuff, you can start with the rule because you get an instant feedback and that's wonderful. Then you actually realize, well, if the rule's running all the time, it's updating as fast as you're trying to change things. An edict can be your friend because an edict runs once an hour, when the document opens, about once an hour when it's opened, whenever you refresh all agents, or whenever you edit any of the text or displayed attributes for that note, and there are 1 or 2 other sort of triggers. And as you can see on the inspector on screen in the bottom right hand corner, there's a run now button. So there are all sorts of ways that just because it's an edict, you can still just say, no, I just want you to do it now, this instant, and you can trigger it without having it run like a rule. If you get to the point where you have a rule, as it were, rule or edict code that's doing really complicated things, often that's when you might want to back it onto a stamp, because you can ask yourself, am I doing this because I can, or am I doing this because I need something remembered? If you tease something out, and a very good example of where this sort of split comes was actually there's a document I'm doing that's basically it's a description of a conference, 30 years of a conference, all the papers. And so one of the things it does is all the author notes linked to all the papers that they've written. But essentially, when I add a new year's worth of information, every author note has to go and look at every other note to see whether it needs to link to it. So you've got 2,500 authors, you've got 1,700 papers, and you can see how this would sort of clog things up, because everything is polling everything else all the time. But you actually only need to run this once. So that's where I sort of then would move that out of an edict into a stamp, because then you just tell the stamp, go do it, and then it's done. And you could always restamp. So there are no absolutes here. The point I'm probably not getting across very clearly is that, dependent on how regularly you actually need stuff to run, it helps you if you just back off the sort of the speed with which it's doing. So a rule runs all the time, an edict runs occasionally, but it will always run, at least certainly once per session, and a stamp will only run when you tell it to run. But you can also, another sort of wrinkle is you can actually use an action to call a stamp. So you can treat a stamp as a bit of saved code, as if it's, you know, that you don't want to put actually into an action. So that gives you a number of ways to approach this problem.
Right. And then here's another example of doing that. So let's say you had a student called Mary Beth McCabe, and she had assignments, 10, that assignment was worth 10 points. Her grade was 9 on this one. This assignment was 20 points, and let's say her grade was 15 on that one. You could have that says to go sum all of the points of the children, go sum all of the grades of the children, then create a percentage and then run it. And then you can instantly say that Mary Beth's getting 80% in the class right now. Right. And so that's another, and yet you haven't changed your name. So that's a really, if you're developing a student roster or a grading roster for a class that you're teaching, that's another really effective way of using that points. And then to emphasize that, you then could add some conditionals. You could say, like, if the percentage is less than or equal to 0.9, no, less than the 0.9, then color equals blue. Make sure I got my right, and then we can say, oh, and you would need to do like a greater than or stuff like that, but just to demonstrate it for now. So if I did this and run it, that should, oh, because it's not less aggressive. Let's do 0.95 just for the sake of this demo. Wrong with my math, Mark. If the percentage is less than 0.95, then color should be blue.
Well, because you've got no, if you put less than 90 rather than 0.95.
Yeah, but her grade's 93. Or no.
Yeah, but you know, let's look at the math.
Oh yeah, that's right,
the grade.
Right. No, her percentage. I need the percentage. So right now the percentage is 80. It's being calculated 80. So that should be blue.
No, because I think if you change if you change it to 90, not 0.90.
Oh, 90. You're right. Yeah, you're right. Yeah, so there you go. So then as you're doing that, you then can also use color as an affordance. And so then you'd want to do like conditionals, you know, less than 1, less between 90 and 1, make it green, between 90, 80 and 89, make it blah. And then, you know, and if it's like lower than 60, it's red, and because they're failing the class. So then you can use, color conditionals as well as that new nature to do that. And so just with this very simple demo, you could see why you wouldn't want to be doing all of that expression code in display expression. You know, it's better to stick that actually not in the node itself. It would be better to stick that in a prototype, where if you went here and you went like Prototypes, we'll just use the person one for now. We grab that. I'm going to change that to P student. All right. Student, drop that in there. So now we've got that as the rule to a student. We can go up and make this P student. We'll make this one P student as well. We'll make this Anderson. All right, we'll copy these assignments, paste them down there. Let's make Mark. Got a 10 out of that one. Got a 20 out of that one. Excuse me, 19 out of that one. Then we also need to grab that and put that here. And then for Mary Beth, we need to go and you see where it says assigned to this note? You need to reset that. So it's now inheriting from the prototype and not from this note. Likewise, we want to do that for her rule. Assign to this note, reset it. So now the Mary Beth note is assigned to that. And you'll see that we're now getting, Mark's getting a 96% and Mary's getting an 80%. And you'll notice that Mark's got a lot of ones here. So if we go back to the prototype now, we can adjust this. We can do it here or we can do it here is fine. Dot precision 1. And so then by doing that, that drops it down to a one point precision on the number. So
and the other thing, Michael, you might show how you'll notice how we're seeing not a number in the so we might show how you don't run that. So you'll need to reset display expression cache for it to work. But
and then on here I go display expression cache. And I delete that there, apply that. And by unchecking this, because this is not an intrinsic, rule is not an intrinsic inherited value. So if I just disable the rule here, that rule will not run on the prototype, but it will continue to run on the notes that are linked or associated with that prototype as a blueprint. And so
and that basically, if you ever wonder why that enable box is there, it's for this very reason, because if you've got a quite complicated prototype that's doing all sorts of sort of funky calculations, it's almost invariably the case that you do not wish to run that in the prototype because it'll go off and it'll set all kind of weird values, which then get it for any attribute that they set them in will be inherited by all the notes that use the prototype. They may get them recomputed and written over, but ideally, if you know you're going to be doing this sort of calculation, you probably want to set the prototype to not be enabled. And as Michael has pointed out, rules and edicts are two notable cases where they are not they are so-called intrinsic. That means that they don't inherit. The flip side comes that you need to do some gymnastics. Sometimes what you want to do is you say you would like to be able to turn off the rule, say in the P student note, and have all 600 students not run their rule. There is a way to do that, but you don't do it by clicking that box because it's intrinsic. The state of the enabled or not in any note, in this case a prototype, is not inherited by any note using that prototype.
Yeah, and how would we do this, Mark? Remind me. So if it was less than 1 and greater than or equal to 0.9, then you should be green.
Use percent numbers, not decimals. So you want 190.
I did it again. And 90. Yeah. Okay. So yes. Yeah. So by doing that, you see now Mark is now green because he's getting an A, and Mary Beth is blue because she's got a B. And you can, and then you could also convert that to numbers, and you can do a whole bunch of different stuff you wanted.
If you're doing this, it's also, although you could do this as because you don't have an else if construct for anyone who's done, those who've done a bit of programming might think to use that. But essentially, if you've got, say, 4 different bandings you want to do here, it's almost easier just to write 4 simple if statements and just make sure that the math, the things don't overlap to your categories. If they do, the last one will always imply that it matches. But basically, if you have a degree of separation, then it's just easier sometimes to just write, those if statements. So these ones are blue, these ones are green, these ones are orange, whatever.
All right. So what we've successfully done thus far is, and now that I've solved that problem, then I can go ahead now and.
Roger, you are awesome.
Right.
Your draft is ready.
Whoops.
Great job.
Let's do it in the one we okay, here's the one we installed. And now I can go ahead and
Michael, you are awesome.
export it.
Your draft is
And
ready.
this is a demonstration of
Great
that problem. And then we can go ahead and then let's clear out these files. Move that. And you'll see.
Michael, you are
that
awesome. Your draft is ready.
So
Great job.
this publishing
Michael, you are
utility
awesome.
that I
Your
developed
draft is ready. Great job.
lets you bring PDF and Pandoc publishing now into any Tinderbox document you may be working on, and all you'll need to do is change 4 variables. You'll need to install Pandoc, and you'll need to install WheezyPrint. You'll need to set up a TBX export directory in your hard drive somewhere. But if you do those 3 activities and then populate those variables into your config file in Tinderbox, you can now publish the PDF into Word documents from any Tinderbox file.
One thing for you, Michael, if you can you just bring back the screen you had that had those paths on it, whichever note you had selected that had the paths to where those utilities were.
What do you mean? Down in my code?
Yeah, you had a note up that had users/Michael's.
Oh, this here. Got it. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So one thing you might consider there, even if you're, say, working across a couple of your own computers, because it might be M Becker on one and Michael Becker on another, is /user/ that name can be replaced with a tilde symbol, which is a sort of Unix shortcut for my home folder. It also means if you sent it to me, that would find, if I had it in the same place inside my thing. So that's another optimization you can probably do, especially if you're going to reuse this.
Right. And so what he's saying is do this. Tilde, which is the shift.
Yeah.
And then, yeah. So by doing that.
No, you want the TB export there. You wanted the TB export.
Oh, yeah, right.
But just bear in mind, it's well, you're seeing it happen here. So it's a bit confusing if you've never seen this Unix notation before. You're thinking, what on earth is that? It's just a shortcut, and what you're having explained to you in a sense here on the movies. This is why it's useful, because it means if it's in this folder inside my home folder, and you have the same folder on your system, if I send this file to you, it will find it. Whereas if it uses the hard-coded path, because the username will be different, then it wouldn't work.
Right. And again, so tilde/ is basically the default for home folder. So now that we've done that, and just to demonstrate it works, create that.
Michael, you are.
I get the draft.
Your draft is ready. Great job.
And by the way, too, if you notice as well, my code is incrementing the version numbers when you're creating new drafts. So if I did that again, this one would become.
Michael, you are awesome. Your draft is ready. Great job.
Another draft, and then you'll see that it's. And then what's also I figured out as well is sometimes when you are publishing your draft, you're like, oh crap, I found a typo. You'll go into the HTML and fix that typo first, because maybe you're running on a deadline and you can't bother republishing a consolidated draft. You'll notice that if Tinderbox finds that there's a note that already has the name version 3 on it, and you're re-exporting a new version of that, it will increment an R4, R3, R5. It will put a revision number of that version number on your hard drive. So that way you can be exporting multiple versions of a standalone draft and then be iterating the version numbering of that too. So that was a little thing I popped in there as well. So that's cool. That tilty thing, I like that. So I just verified, by doing that, we just validated that that works. Okay. the next thing I want to, and so anybody have any last minute comment questions on what we just went through, either the Pandoc PDF exporting, the dynamic creation of standalone drafts, or the display expression and calculations? Anybody thoughts, comments, reactions? Bueller, anybody? Dave, you're always good for a comment. What's your thoughts?
Gonna make me unmute. I'm not much of an output guy, so
Yeah.
I do all my work in Tinderbox, and apart from the blog, it all stays there. So
No, but like the display expression thing we just went through as well, not just the file I was demonstrating.
yeah, I mean, that was I was thinking about that in terms of using it for Captain's Log, but I can also append or make use of subtitle, but you know, it's not something that seems to have an immediate utility for my use case for Tinderbox. But
Got it.
I mean, the place I could see you not needing to use it, but you could use it if you or someone doing similar. So you're writing essentially a fairly sort of simple blog. I mean, because there's nothing construction that you're doing that's complicated about it. Is that you might, for instance, it could be useful to know that for, say, because you have a monthly folder, don't you, for each month's posts, just a display expression that tells you that there were 30 posts this month, but there were, you know, the other thing, there were only 29 posts, whatever. And that's so, you know, it can be useful because over time I mean, or it might not be the number of posts, it might be the cumulative number of something, for
right.
instance. And so the same process that you've seen, you could use. Now, it doesn't necessarily need to go as far as the export. You could just use it internally. It's basically representational tellback to you if you need it of something that otherwise you'd have to go and look up. And as you've seen, you can, by using the sort of display cache type approach, you can make sure that all that calculation, no matter how much you need to do, isn't stepping on anything else.
Okay. And then Phil, I could see that working for your teaching as well. All right. So if we don't have any other reactions on that, I want to move to my other topic of the day. So I am teaching a course for National University in 2 weeks, and I'm working on refining the course and development within a new Tinderbox document. And part of what I wanted to do was to let me see, where is the it's like week 1. Okay, so up in the overview here, you'll see I've got learning activities and learning assignments. And what I wanted to be able to do is, you know, here's the overview, students. For this week, I want you to read this. I want you to watch this in the overview. And then as they go down in the outline, they'll actually see down here in assignments and activities what they're supposed to be reading and what they're supposed to be watching and reviewing. And Mark came up with a really interesting observation a few weeks back, in that if you're using the value function in Tinderbox, and just so everyone that may not be familiar with this, the value function is in Tinderbox what we call export code. So if I say note 1, I say note 2, and again, to demonstrate this in a simpler file, let's say we go let's use the grade again as an example. Create an attribute called grade, number 0.93, right? So if I'm here in note 2, I can say value, and what am I telling Tinderbox? I'm saying, and this both works in the text of a note, and it also works in, obviously, in any of your export templates or anything of that nature. So if I'm in the text of a note or I'm working in an export template, I can say value, and then what value do I want you, you know, and then again, just to have the complete structure there, it's value parenthesis end caret. And you technically don't need the end caret, but I have to put it there because it shows that I've ended the statement. So what value do I want? Well, I want the grade value from note number 1. So I'm going to say grade. And if I just said value, and let's demonstrate it in this way. If I say value grade, and let's say this note had a grade on it as well.
You'll need to change the value. You're missing an R in the grade.
Yeah. Value grade. Okay. So let's say I said value grade, and all I did on note 2 is I said value grade, and I now wanted to preview this note. What I'm going to get is 0.2 because I'm telling Tinderbox, get me the value for the attribute grade, and Tinderbox will assume, because I've not provided any other designation, that I'm getting the grade for this note. So if I were to say value grade this, the designation concept this, I would still get 0.2 because this is this. Now, if I were to say, give me the value for note 1, what I'm telling Tinderbox to do is, and one little trick, by the way, I have a hotkey on my computer that turns on and off smart notes or smart quotes, and I just muscle memory it now whenever I do this. But if you're doing it this way, one of the things and let me finish showing you what happens, and I'll show you where it breaks. If you do value grade and then you give it a designation, well, which grade do I want you to get? I want you to get note 1 grade. So now I do that. Tinderbox has reached out and gotten the grade value for note 1. So this is incredibly useful as you're developing more advanced calculations and Tinderbox capabilities and display elements. Now, the point I was saying here earlier, if smart quotes was turned on and I did that, it wouldn't work. And you may find yourself, you're like spending a half an hour, 45 minutes, kicking yourself, wondering what the hell and why is it not working. You know your value code's right. And then you realize, oh crap, my smart quotes are on. And so if I turn those off, do straight quotes. And I cannot tell you how many hours in my life I have wasted tracking down a errant quote. So that's that is a really, really useful affordance and methodology. So with that in mind, the one of the things I wanted, and here's my question mark. So, or for all of you, but I think, and I can play with it, but I thought we'd just do it together as a group in the last 20 minutes or so that we have. So you'll see here, what I'm doing is I'm saying, hey, Tinderbox, take my function, which is list children advanced, and go to note ID 41. And by the way, here's another development trick. If you notice, I've got my my columns turned on. If I put ID here, this is a really, really helpful development trick when you're playing around with stuff like this. So if I scroll down and find note 41, you'll note that note 41 is this one right here, 41. So what I'm essentially telling Tinderbox to do is, hey, Tinderbox, go to note 41 and then, pass the ID number note 41 to the function list children advanced. And this is saying pass the ID number to list a children function advanced for the watch folder. And essentially what that list function does is it goes and grabs the children of that designated note and puts them into a bulleted list. So now if I preview that note, you'll notice it's giving me, this is what I want you to read for that week. And there's nothing in the watch because I haven't done that part of it, of the curriculum development yet. It will be done by the end of today. I know it's Easter and I should be working, but there you go. So now here's the question I had for you, Mark. So let me pause there. Does that make sense for everybody? So this is a really interesting let's pause here. I'm using the value function to pull a value, but the values I'm getting, I'm using the value export code to pull a value, but the values I'm generating are actually being done from a very complex couple hundred line function to actually produce that value. And so
it is worth saying the trick here for anyone who's sort of read all the handbooks or has been playing this game a long time is, before you would have done this using a do macro, which goes right back to the dawn of Tinderbox. But now we have functions. You don't need to do that. And because also the macros are stored away in a corner of the inspector that everyone forgets about. So now basically you can write a single function or as many functions as you need, but you call the outermost function, you feed it the inputs it needs, which in this case is the value of one note, the ID of a particular note. And it then, as you've just seen, actually returned quite a bit of text. So it's really neat. It means you can put a very, very small bit of code into a note that's, you know, that for all your other purposes is broadly textual. So it means that you don't have to have an enormous great goblet of code right in the middle of something that you're otherwise trying to read, because it just makes it difficult to work with. So it's quite a neat encapsulation. And I think it's something that we just have been working on recently, but it's probably time that essentially we can deprecate the use of macros. You don't need, they'll still work, but you don't need to use that. You don't need to use that elder notation anymore.
Yeah. And then, and again, the great thing about that is we all know I have typos and all that. So what's great about this is in my overview section of my document, now that I have this set up, I'm never going to have to think about, let's say I go and add a new item to what I want the students to read. Well, if I go back to the summaries and render it, that new item, and my action code uses display expressions. So sometimes it takes a little bit for the code to catch up. You'll see that new item that I added to the list automatically gets added into the overview. So I don't have to worry about keeping my those two parts of the document in sync. Tinderbox does that for me automatically, as opposed to having to do it manually. So that's super, super valuable in my opinion. So Mark, here's my question. And I don't know if I'll have enough time to go through it, but I'd like to be able to not have to manually input this. So what I'd like to do is create a action code that would said, and I'll demonstrate, and I'll show you what I tried, and then show you where I got confused a little bit. But basically, go find your grandparent, get the ID of your grandparent, and then find the notes that is labeled red and labeled watch in your grandparent's descendants. Because I have a very strict structure in this. There will only be one red and only one watch in that grandparent hierarchy. And so, but I found something really interesting when I was playing with this. If I go here, and this was kind of the code that I was playing with, but let me make this a little bit easier. So if I were to say variable string, let's just do be name for now. And I say, and the name is going to be name of my grandparent. Now, I found this really interesting, and tell me what I'm doing wrong here. If I go show,
well, do you want to, given what we said earlier, why not use ID here?
I know I would use ID, but for that point, I just want to I want to visualize something specifically.
Okay. Yep.
And so now I'm saying show v name, right?
Yeah.
So what I'm expecting is, and this is what I'm finding interesting. So I'm on activity summary.
Yeah.
My parent is overview.
Yeah.
And my parent and my grandparent would be week 1 strategy.
Yep.
And so you see here, okay, so I am getting that. Before I wasn't getting, I was getting the top level root. So so that's working now. So I'm getting my week 1 strategy. So now to your point, I'm going to return the ID of that.
You can, if you needed to get something like great grandparent, you can actually nest the designators as well. If we
do that. So now we do like that, and so we show, and so I'm getting 5-2, 5-2. Yep. So now I've got my grandparent, and so then I want to collect I then want to say variable list v list equals collect descendants. I wish Mark would let descendants be auto-populated here. IDs. Right. So I'm now telling Tinderbox to collect the descendants of all of the grandparents' notes. And then we say, and then let's create another variable called variable.
Well, hold on. If you want, if you can do this in one go, you could say collect underscore if.
Yeah. That's what I mean.
Name equals read, for instance.
Yeah, or watch, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
You're right.
Well, no, because presumably you want to collect those two things separately, because you want to put the right ID in the right thing. So you do this twice, once to get the read ID and once to get the watch ID.
So
And then you can compile your your caret string value thing.
equals read.
Equals.
Yeah. Read. Right?
Yep.
And then I do that again. And this wouldn't be a list, this would be a string.
Yeah, because I mean, the thing you'd note to yourself at some point is that you're doing a string because you know that you're never going to have more than one return, because collect does in fact return a list, but obviously if it returns a list of one thing, you essentially get a string out of it.
Right, and then watch. Okay, so now I have that is my stamp. And then I could say, and let's just show those. So I've got it. So show VID read plus a space plus VID watch. And for those that are watching,
you've got a capital E in the V read in
yeah.
that line.
Yeah, for those that are watching, if when I'm doing this quick and dirty, I use the show function. And when I'm not, or if I really need to debug it, I'll create a log. And I love the concept of everything going to 11. So I always have my log be, this one goes to 11. For those that know Spinal Tap, it's a joke. So we can do that same kind of logging capability there. So basically what this is going to do when I run this stamp on that note, it's going to return nothing and it will bring nothing to the log. So we got to see what's wrong with my code here. So this collect if should have worked. Right. So what's wrong? Why am I not? Is this?
You want you're talking. Well, you stamped this note, but you want the descendants. You actually want the descendants of the of VID.
Oh yeah, of VID. That's right.
So I think I can't remember if you can put an offset reference on this.
You can't.
So you want VID then.
Right. So this is another great example of like when we were doing that value example of getting grade from this note versus getting the grade from note 1. This is a great another example of that designation concept. So now I'm telling Tinderbox, go collect the descendants of VID, which is my grandparent, which we calculated here, and then bring that back. So you'll see I'm now getting there's 4.1, there's 4.2. So I've now got my read notes. So then if I've done that, for the sake of arguments, what I then can do is, let's go ahead and do this. And I'm going to drop my list. I'll clean this up for myself later, but for the sake of us doing it now, we'll do it here. So I've got a point called my list. And so then I'll do my list equals B read plus VID. So now when I run this, you'll see that my item, I got those 2 items in the list. And so then, and I could delete, we got to ask, help me understand the quickest way to not get the brackets in there, but let's fix that.
Okay, well, you'll get the brackets because you're looking at a string representation of a list, and the square brackets now tell you this is a list type. What you do want to do probably is
make it a list.
You want,
there you go. So by making the designations not a string, a list, then even though I know it's a single item coming back, even though designating as list is better, so I don't get there. So now, and if we remember, lists they allow duplicates. In this context, I'll never have any duplicates of note names, and they as opposed to sets. So lists do not alphabetically sort each other, as opposed to sets, which do alphabetically sort each other. So that's another reason why I'm using lists in this context, is I don't want them to alphabetically sort each other. And I'm telling Tinderbox, go get me the read item, go get me the watch item. So in the way I've constructed this, I'm always going to know read will be number 1 and watch will be number 2. So now,
so the sort is more that it's an auto sort. with a set, you cannot stop it sorting.
Right.
So regardless of what the sort actually is, you have to take what it gives you. With a list will remember. It will allow you to have duplicates. It will remember to have any order, and it will not change it unless you apply a sort to it or do something like that.
And so I think this should work now. So now if I say send to child list my list dot at 0 and send to my list dot at 1. So 0 and explain that I never have a good explanation for this, Mark. It's a 10 based list management, and the first position in a list is designated as 0.
No, it's the old-fashioned way, because ones and zeros used to be expensive, so you didn't want to waste those zeros. So the first position in a list in a lot of older systems is 0. It's just one of those bizarre things, and it's normally 0 unless it's not, and it's 1. And then you just have to look at the documentation. In this case, it's a zero based list. So
Right.
the first position is 0, the second position is 1, and then onwards.
So in other words, now when I preview this, there you go. There's my list. And so now the great thing about doing this is, now that we've done this, I can drop this code into the edict of this note, or as we've seen in my previous videos, on the on visit triggering of that. And so then what I'll be able to do now is copy this note and to every one of the positions. And so I won't have to now forever figure out which ID number I want. That ID
In
number.
fact, you can do one more thing. You could actually take that text that says read and watch, and you could produce all of that as part of the stamp, because you've got the IDs, you've done that bit.
Right.
But I mean, you can. So in other words, you write your note, press the stamp, and it just adds that, but effectively all that boilerplate for you.
Yeah. Or to the point I was just suggesting, I put this code in here, and rather than it being a stamp, it's an edict. And it's just constantly, whenever I'm copying and pasting these notes around or moving them around to different classes, different versions of the classes, those ID numbers will always be correct and updated for that particular week, that particular session when I'm teaching that class. And we did it with 30 seconds left in our session today. So yeah, we covered a lot today. It was good. So this last thing, effectively what we did is not only solve my problem for some course development that I need to work on. We covered a lot in learning on how to generate and manage lists, how to work with designators, how to work with conditional collect statements, and working with variables. So there's a ton of stuff we covered in this last bit of today's session. Okay, so let's take a big breath. We can go on and run long a little bit longer. If any of you have any comments, thoughts, observations, clarifying questions you'd like to ask. Mary Beth, you came off video, anything?
No, just trying to see what you're doing with National. I'm kind of curious to see what's the class you're teaching.
Well, yeah, so just that we all know the history. Mary Beth, about 14 years ago, she used to be the department chair of marketing for National University. So brought me in as an adjunct professor into National. And so I'm teaching their May asynchronous course on mobile marketing in 2 weeks. And I'll be doing that this month. And I'm revamping the courseware that I got the courseware from the school yesterday. And I'm like, oh my God, this has to be revamped. So I'm revamping the courseware that I'll be teaching in the next 2 weeks. And you'll see that we're incorporating the different sections of our textbook. So
Fantastic.
Which Mary Beth and I have written together. So and doing so increasingly more and more in Tinderbox, which is also exciting. Kim, Roger, any comments, thoughts?
Nope.
All right.
Oh, good stuff. Also, your 5Cs, you can purchase that right online. I saw that, so I'm gonna get a copy of that.
Yeah, there's 5 different modules. It's all part of the classes. So
Thank you. Thanks for putting that together. Thank you.
Yeah, no, my pleasure. And part of that too is just so I can support them as well. I mean, there's a lot that's going into these files. Okay, well, thank you very much. That was a marathon of Tinderboxing today. That was fun. So with that in mind, happy Easter, everybody, and we will see you next week.
All right.
Bye.